All right, here we go. Quarantine continues, and I told you guys in a video recently when I talked about Nebula, where I had to do a bit of an undervolt to get any sort of an overclock on this 18-core Intel CPU to stay anywhere near reasonable when it comes to temperatures. One thing I think we can all agree on is as AMD's core count increased with its Threadripper lineup, they did a much better job at keeping temperatures in check versus what Intel has done with something that's got a fraction of the amount of cores as some of the top tier like 3990Xs and such now. Even Phil's 3970X editing rig, and it's on water just like this system is, has twice as many cores as we have in this 18-core Intel CPU, yet this one gets way hotter. So a lot of you guys showed interest in how I did the undervolt and gained just as much performance while undervolting and still overclocking with Intel. So I thought maybe I'd just kind of take you guys along for the ride on some of the steps that I did and some of the features and tweaks that I made to the BIOS to get it reasonable-ish. You know what, guys? I got new merch. It's available now, crowdmade.com/JC. We got zip-up hoodies, we got tri-blend, we got a new logo. I digress. Since 2012, it's a digress logo. You guys have been asking for that. Anyway, we got all kinds of stuff. Zip-up hoodies, beanies, polos. Don't take my word for it, because obviously I can't do this ad. So just look in the description below and you guys will find the link. Thanks. If you guys hear fan noise, I'm sorry. It's starting to get warm here in SoCal, and I'm gonna do the best I can with what I got here at the house. Now, if you're gonna try this yourself, it's gonna be fairly the same when it comes to AMD, although you're gonna use AMD's Ryzen Master to do all this stuff, or whatever they decided to name it this month. We're gonna be doing this a bit more manual when it comes to Intel and doing it in the BIOS. There are some programs that you can use to do this at a Windows level, like using Intel XTU or Extreme Tuning Utility, but I like to do things in the BIOS because I know they're a bit more stable and they're not going to conflict. Even though XTU writes to the BIOS, I like to do it the old-fashioned way. Oh, and sorry that I'm pointing a camera at the screen. I can't exactly capture this screen for two reasons. One, it's 3840 by 1600, so it's the width of 4K, but the height of a 1600 panel. They don't have capture cards that'll capture this weird resolution. Two, I use DisplayPort. Those capture cards use HDMI, so I'm not able to do a screen capture. Three, I'm gonna be doing all kinds of reboots, and I can't exactly do a screen capture when I'm in the BIOS unless I'm using another PC, and I don't have a stream PC because those are dumb, and we'll be talking about in the future in another video why you don't need a streaming PC anymore, even if you're on a low-end PC. But with all that out of the way, here are the pieces of software that you're gonna want. One, hardware monitor. It's CPU ID HWM or HW monitor. It's a free utility that will show you all sorts of things with your system. Your voltages, your CPU load, everything down to memory, your any smart devices like your hard drives that are reporting temperature, all that stuff's gonna show up here. As you can see, we've got our 36 threads worth of CPU right here. Here's our core clocks and temperatures on each core plus the package. And then we can see our voltages right here, and they're fluctuating between 0.8 volts to 1.105. Looks like it's the highest. Nope, 1.131. Nope, 1.171. So as you can see, they vary. The other thing you're gonna need is some sort of a load utility. Now, what I'm gonna be using for today is Cinebench R15, or no, R20. And the reason why I'm using R20 is because it will put a significant AVX instruction set load on the CPU, which means we're gonna be able to really see what the temperature spike is. The other thing we could probably do too is a more reasonable load, which would be like 3D Mark's CPU test only. Now, to test an overclock stability, you need to make sure it can pass all of your programs, which means all your games, whatever streaming software, maybe whatever rendering software, video editing stuff. If you can get through all of those workflows without crashing, then you're stable. No single program or even 2 or 3 programs is gonna say, hey, this system's stable in everything. Until it passes everything you do, it's not considered stable. But obviously we're gonna need to get some baseline information to go off of here. This is a Intel 9980XE, like I already said. We are running an Asus Rampage Omega, which is an X299 motherboard. It is water cooled with 2 420mm radiators. It's also rather warm today. It's probably about 76 degrees Fahrenheit in this room right now, a little warmer than I'd like it to be. But that's because I had the windows and the door shut and the computer on and the air conditioner in the house was off. So again, we are dealing with the odds stacked against us of getting some decent results, but that's okay. We're gonna make the results decent by doing the undervolt. So the first thing we need to do right here is get our baseline. So I'm gonna run Cinebench R20 just one time, because what we're testing here are the temperature spikes, because this CPU, with having such a focused amount of cores, is going to see a temperature spike long before we ever see the coolant temperature increase. With water cooling, it takes a while for the water, depending on how much is in your loop, to reach equilibrium or its maximum temperature based on the heat it's having to dissipate from the loop. So what I'm going to be looking over here for on hardware monitor is, what are the individual voltages to each core going to go? What is our voltage going to be on the main vCore voltage? This is core voltage. This is the actual package voltage, or vCore right there. And then I obviously care about package temp and individual core temps. But we're clearly running warm right now because our cores are sitting in the 50s right now doing absolutely nothing. And it's funny because the package is bouncing around between the high 20s, low 30s, but the cores are sitting in the 50s. And what that tells me is we don't have nearly enough fan speed, and we probably don't have enough pump speed either. Part of the problem with these motherboards and their out-of-the-box settings is they want to optimize silence, and you're gonna get all sorts of temperature problems with that. And to prove it, let's go and go right now. So temperature-wise, you can see our package is showing only in the mid 40s, but that's why you can't only go by the little readout that's on the actual front of the motherboard, because that's what this number is that it's showing. Because if you look at the cores, they're all in the 70s. So as you can see, there is a 30 degrees discrepancy between the package temperature and the core temperature. And we care about core temp. And these are all stock settings on water getting into the 70s with our core speeds only at 3.3 gigahertz all core. Now what we want to do obviously is get that all core up as high as we can without getting the temperature as high as we can. And as you can see, we had a score right here of 7,575. And you can, spoiler alert, I've got this CPU up to 10,392. One thing you might notice here is the core frequency is bouncing all around, and we were only at 3.3 all core, but you'll see over here it went as high as 4.4 megahertz on almost every core. And the reason for that is, as you can see, the load of the world thread, or the main thread of the computer, is bouncing around. It's spiking up to its turbo clock, which is why it's individually showing all these clocks higher on the right. So that's why we care about monitoring this in real time. You might look at this and go, I'm getting a really weird all core. That's not all core. This is real time, and you want to see what that was, and it was 3.3 as we already showed. So I'm going to be doing times by extreme, because this also puts a bigger load on the CPU than the regular time spy. And we're just going to turn off the graphics test. This isn't a GPU test. This is a CPU only. We're also going to run this in a windowed mode. That way we can keep an eye on what's going on over here with our temperatures as well. Cinebench R20 is on Intel, immediately goes to the AVX instructions, which means way more heat. And that's why most BIOS has an AVX offset, which is basically a clock reduction when it sees that there is an AVX instruction. That way it can save its temperatures. When we do our overclocking, I actually turn that off, and I still manage to get the temperatures reasonable. So we're gonna kind of show you that today. Also too, this video is gonna probably be a little longer than normal, but I think you'll learn something, maybe. All right, so we're seeing the temperatures roughly the same, high 60s, low 70s. So they look like they're about 5-6 C on average per core less. But if we come down to the clock speed, you can see our clock speed is actually bouncing around quite a bit and going higher. It's at 3.3 to 3.8. See, it's on 3.8 all core right there. So the reason why you're seeing the temperatures go up, well, not really up, but stay high, is because, even though this is a less demanding test than R20, is because it's giving more core clock to it right now. But we're still way below what we want it to be, obviously, at 3.8. That's noob level. We need to be deep into the 4s at least. And to be honest, I don't care what these numbers are, as long as they're below what we're setting our TJ Max to, which is 105. Many of you might go, oh my God, 105 is way too hot for the Extreme series. But we know that this particular CPU can handle it because it is a soldered TIM. We know that we're gonna be able to push this much farther. So now that we've got an idea of what it was going to, our voltages look like they didn't even really pass 1.1 volts. We are gonna go ahead and reboot right now into the UEFI, because we want to now set our core clock where we want it, and we are going to now see what the stock temperature or what the stock voltage goes to when we leave it at auto, because we want to see how much voltage it thinks the CPU needs. We're going to let the motherboard decide, and I can tell you right now, it's wrong. So here's the Asus BIOS in its big O stretched out glory. Now if we come over here to AI Tuner, you have two options. You can go manual or XMP. XMP is just going to load the XMP profile for the memory, but it's pretty much going to leave the CPU at stock. What I'm going to do right here is turn Asus multi-core enhancement. I'm going to leave it on auto. I'm going to leave the AVX instruction core ratio negative offset to 0. By default, that number is 3. but we're gonna leave it at 0 because I don't want it to slow down the clocks in AVX instruction. Same thing with the 512. Leave that at 0. What we're also gonna do is core ratio. We are gonna set that to sync all cores, and we're gonna set the all core limit to 4.6. That's telling us 4.6 gigahertz. Now we got this CPU up to 5.9 gigahertz on LN2. I know the CPU is capable of it, but we clearly don't have the cooling for it. And I can't even get anywhere near 5 without even going ice water. So 4.6 is about as far as we're gonna let it go. I'm gonna leave the cache ratio at auto, and I'm gonna leave the memory frequency also at auto for now. And then the CPU core voltage, we're also gonna leave it auto. I'm really curious as to what it's gonna do voltage-wise. Save and restart, and then I'm gonna go back into the BIOS and see, make sure those numbers applied, and then I'm gonna run the same test again. Okay, so here we are back in the desktop. You can see now it's pumping 1.2 volts into the vid, and it's locked there. Our core clocks, as you can see, our core temperatures are kind of bouncing around the 30s, 40s, and 50s. Packages at, well, going as high as 50 right now, but you can also see our core clock is also locked at 4.6. Now, I don't really want that to be the case. I'm okay with allowing it to move around, but I just want to double check right now, though, if we go into power settings, that we're not on, yeah, see, we're on high performance right now. I'm gonna set that to balanced, because I want to let the core clock come down. I don't want it to be shoving all this heat in there if we don't need it to. So make sure you're on balanced, just so that we can get a realistic situation here in terms, yeah, see, now our core clocks came down, they're in 1200, our cores are down in the 30s. That's perfectly fine. But what happens as soon as we say run this test? Ooh, okay, 90s, 80s, 96 on the package. Fans are going full blast. We are hitting 80s and 90s. That's actually not that bad. I say not that bad. 105 is where we're gonna let it start to thermal throttle. We stayed at 4.6 the whole time. But as you can see, we're at 98C on the package, 70s on some cores, 90s on the other. That's just core density right there. You're never gonna get them to be even all the way across the board. But as you can see, we just got a new high score of 10,417. Our voltage, it looks like it's stuck at 1.2 on the vid, but our V core went as high as 1.328. That is far too far. But what I'm kind of curious now, and I'm gonna go ahead and run the Cinebench, or the 3D Mark, is I'm curious as to what it's gonna do in that test. I think we might be able to go as high as 4.7, maybe even 4.8. Oh wow, okay, so our max temp on the package was 82. Looks like the lowest core was 68. And then as high as 82 was the hottest core. Oh, and we went up to a 10,316 on the CPU score there. So we gained, what, 2,600? Something around there? Math, whatever. We gained a lot, that's what matters. And if we look at our temperatures, one could say, yeah, you're fine. You don't have to undervolt. But why not? If you can, and there's performance to be had, and the performance doesn't change, and you can make the system cooler, why not? Well, what we're gonna go ahead and do now is I'm gonna bump it to 4.7 and see what happens. I'm curious as if I can get a 4.7 stable with lower temperatures than we're seeing now. So the only setting I'm gonna change here is from 46 to 47 on the CPU ratio. Keep in mind, we haven't even touched our memory clock yet. And as we've already shown in our previous video, that memory speed does matter in some instances, and 3D Mark is one of them. We are going to go ahead right now and just do that one test, do everything again, see what the voltages are going to, see what the temps are going to, and then we're gonna start manually pulling back voltage. Oh yeah, there's 103, 106, 107, 109, hundreds on the cores, 104, 108. Funny enough, our clock is not dropping, which means the setting that is designed to save the CPU is probably not active right now, because it should be downclocking, because we are over TJ max on 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 cores. Hottest core is 110C, or 230 degrees Fahrenheit. And if you look over here on the left, we went from a 10,417 to a 10,599. Not a huge difference, quite honestly, like not much at all. That would be a poor trade-off. But as you know, we've got to do our 3D Mark test now just so that we can keep our numbers consistent. We are seeing 88C on the package. It shows 67C on the actual motherboard itself, but our core clock, or core temps are sitting in the 70s, with the hottest cores at 90C exactly. What I'm gonna do next is simply lock the voltage at the 1.250 I'm gonna see if we can get away with that on vCore, because there's V droop in there too. It dropped from 1.328 to 1.264, so it V drooped already. It brought the voltage down. I don't think we can go much lower, which means I don't think we're gonna get 4.7 at a reasonable temperature with an undervolt. Another thing to kind of show that we're in diminishing return land is we only went up to 10,445. So we gained a little bit more score, tiny bit, but these trade-offs are not worth that. All right, so not only did I go in here and manually set the voltage to 1.25, I left it at 4.7. I'm just kind of curious whether or not we'll sync or pass. I also went ahead to put the memory back up to 3200 megahertz. I want to run the XMP profile on memory, and I need to make sure that the temperatures and the memory controller and all that can handle the additional heat as well. So you want to test this with your memory set to where it's going to be. Now, I also went in here and adjusted all of my fan curves. And you're gonna have to do this based on your system and your fans and where they're all plugged in. But I basically have got it to pretty much set it very silent mode when it's not under load. But then when it goes under a heavy load, just ramp the fans up. I don't even care about the noise. I'd much rather have the noise and a CPU that's still alive rather than worrying about the temperatures being a little bit on the, worry about the noise being a little bit too high. Now, I'm gonna tune for Cinebench. Although Cinebench is a harder test, if I can't get through Cinebench with the temperatures okay, I don't consider myself in check in terms of temps. So once Cinebench is okay, then I'll validate what the temperatures really are in something like 3D Marks and games. But I tune for Cinebench, and then I know from there, I'll have a stable PC for the most part, in any of the other type of gaming scenarios that I could possibly experience. Now the funny thing is, by me unlocking the vCore at 1.25, that's what our vid went to. But we're still at 1.312 on the vCore. It was there it is, 1.304. It's fluctuating a little bit. So I'm curious as to whether or not this is gonna stay stable with that voltage being a little bit lower. In order to get the temps down, we need to lower the voltages kind of across the board. Now we're gonna see if whether or not reducing our voltage caused us any kind of a problem. Okay, there's 100, 101, 104, 106, 107. 1.25 volts still across the board on the core. Did we go up on score? Or drop, I should say? No, we went up, 10,610. Okay, although I think 109, 110, 107, 101, 101, 107, 109, 107. We have more cores in the red now than we did before, so clearly more tuning is necessary. And I'm gonna start by dropping the vCore. Now just to kind of explain something, some people might be watching this right now, and I didn't do my traditional reset into UEFI here. Jay, you locked the voltage lower. The vCore was lower. It was all the way down to 1.1 something during that test. Although stable, why did the temps go up? Well, that's because we increased the memory speed as well, and that puts stress on the memory controller, which is also located inside of the CPU. So we added more heat through the memory controller as well. That's why we have to do this tuning. I've set the voltage now to 1.2, and what I'm trying to do is by lowering that voltage, I want to find where we crash. Once we crash, we have a decision to make. Do we add a little bit more voltage and see what our temperatures are, or do we reduce the clock speed by 100 megahertz and see if we're okay with that performance? I still have a feeling we're gonna land somewhere around the 4.6 instead of 4.7, because I did find with this CPU in previous testing that from 4.6 to 4.7 took a significant more amount of voltage and heat to get it stable. But as I kind of showed you in the beginning of during this testing, that from 4.6 to 4.7 was not a huge jump in performance. But obviously from 3.3 to 4.6 is massive. Or even 3.3 to 4.3, that's 1,000 megahertz, that's huge. We're either gonna get a blue screen or better temperatures or neither. 102, 103. Now we're set to throttle at 110. That's what I actually set it to. I went to BIOS and checked, it's at 110, which is not good. But our temperatures are starting to come down, and we're actually at 1.225. I lied when I said 1.2, but we are still at 10,699. So we have not lost performance yet, but we have lost some temperature. But I'm not happy with this yet. I've got to find where it crashes. One other thing I did change previously, and I just went down to 1.2, is I did change the CPU input voltage from auto to 1.8. We would go as high as 2.0, 2.1 when we were doing the extreme overclocking, but we're not pulling those kinds of voltages. And since we're reducing voltage, we can reduce this too, which means that we can bring down the package temperature as a whole. One other thing that I did too, I disabled CPU SVID support. What this is doing, this is where the CPU will communicate with the voltage regulator, and that's part of what causes not necessarily V-droop, but power limit and all that sort of stuff. Now we just disabled that, and I'm expecting by disabling it, we might see the temperature come back up. But I've never actually played with that setting before, so I'm kind of curious now as to what it's going to do. Our V-core is all the way down to 1.16 volts. All right, this has got to be the one where it crashes. It's not nearly enough voltage. 1.15 all core, 4.7. Okay, there it is. I know now that 1.175 is where I'm gonna put it back to. Now, to be fair, I sort of broke a rule in that last test. I dropped two things. You wanna make changes one at a time. And the reason why you wanna do that is if you change more than one thing, you're not gonna know exactly what had the effect. So I dropped the voltage in as well as the V-core. So what I'm gonna do right now is I'm gonna put the voltage in back to 1.8 because there's gonna become a point where if I drop the VIN too far and I go below where the memory controller needs its voltage and the cache needs its voltage, because that voltage in is then being split to all the different sub inside the CPU that needs voltage. And if I drop that too far, then I'm not doing those things any favor. So I'm gonna leave it at 1.15, but I'm gonna put the VIN to 1.8 just to make sure that that wasn't causing our problem. So with the VIN back up, I expect it to also crash in the same spot. Or not. So this is a good sign. This tells me that I was reducing the VIN too much. Oh, it just crashed right there. Okay, so now we know we need to go back up to 1.175 volts on the core if I'm happy with 4.7, and I am. So let's go and put the voltage back, run through this test a bunch of times, make sure it doesn't crash, check 3D Mark, and I'll show you the final step. Now this is sometimes what happens. Once you experience your first crash, and even though you go back to the settings that you know worked, you'll start to get these sorts of issues happening here where it just suddenly won't boot. Now what I'm doing now is I'm just doing another fresh restart. If that doesn't work, I'll do a full power cycle. Turn off the CPU, turn off the power supply, clear the caps, and let it start again. It's kind of weird how sometimes once you get a crash, you get, I don't know if it gets stuck in memory or what, but there becomes an issue sometimes. What I like to do is force memory retraining. I'll sometimes take modules out and switch them and then put them back. That way it just forces the BIOS to do something to retrain and all of that. But it's frustrating when you go back to a setting that you know worked and then you start getting blue screens. But it's not uncommon too for you to see a recovery issue also when you crash in a Windows environment, because it then goes, wait a minute, the files weren't put away properly, something's wrong, let's repair. And then I just did as you saw right now, which is just restart my PC and it works. So I just wanted to show that because it happened, and a lot of people get frustrated when you revert settings and then you start getting blue screens or repair screens and all that stuff. I left the vid at 1.170. I reduced it just a skosh because I was curious, and we are sitting with our temperatures, I think, perfectly reasonable. 95 on the package, 70s and 80s with a couple of cores hitting 93. Let's see what the realistic temperatures look like once we go into Cinebench, or 3D Mark. And we are sitting in temperatures that are roughly equal to the stock 3.3 gigahertz turbo speed at 1.4 gigahertz faster because we came in and tuned the voltage ourselves. Oh, 10,913, close enough. But our max temperatures, as you could see, was at 78C. That was during loading the test. So there you have it. By simply finding out what the stock voltages were and then locking it there and stepping it down on your own until you get a blue screen and bringing the voltage back up a tad, you can see that you can actually reduce your thermals by a lot and increase your performance by a lot, and keep your temperatures relatively unchanged without dealing with the amount of voltage it wants to pump automatically, because they have to try and account for millions of CPUs in the wild. Tune for yours, and you can tinker around and have some fun with it. Once you figure out what works for you, make sure you save it in your BIOS. That way you can revert to it later if you ever have to update your BIOS or you just forget. So make sure you save it, because you might deal with a blue screen in the future requiring a little bit of more tinkering, because you might find that it takes a few days to a few weeks to find what's truly stable once you start going through all your programs. Anyways, you guys asked for this video once I mentioned I had to do some tuning with Nebula when I talked about some of the problems with her in the past. And here it is. Hopefully you guys found it enjoyable and you learned something, a little bit less entertainment and a little bit more teaching in this video. These are the kind of videos I like to make as well, arming you with some knowledge of how things work and then making your PCs run better. Thanks for watching, guys, and as always, we'll see you in the next one.